Good morning once again, and thank you very much for your attention and time. The previous lesson we had was very short, and we looked at, amongst other things, Ghanaian's 9 principles of learning. And this morning, we want to continue and look at a few other um, aspects of our model. And so I'll quickly go ahead and share my screen with you, and then we take it up from there. Thank you for coming. Right. So this morning we'll begin with the Regulus elaboration theory. Now, the Regulus elaboration theory has structured or is structured in 9 different ways. The first of it is how we organize our course structure. It says that a single organization for complete course ought to be put in place. We ought to be able to put in place a single entity or a single whole of our course, such that, for example, having the manual, which is complete, such as having the course outline, which is complete and a part of the manual, such as having course materials, which is complete and a part of the manual. So Regulus is saying that for us to be able to have a good lesson preparation, we should have a good course structure that is organized. Secondly, he celebrated that we should have a movement or transition from simple to the complex. We start our lessons or we start our teachings such that we move from what is simple, the simplest ideas, and then as we progress, we can move to more complex aspects of the course. Then we should also move within lesson sequence, or we should take a closer look at what we call the within lesson sequence. How is the lesson moving from one step to another? We should have a general to a detailed way of explaining theories or aspects of what we are learning. You start from the general and then you move on to the detail. We start from what is simple and then we move on to the complex levels. And then we also have what we call the summarizers. Content that we are delivering to our students, we should be able to review what we are presenting in such a way that there's a summary of what we are doing and they are able to follow the examples of what we are trying to let them have or guide them. The lessons we are guiding them to have, we should be able to have a summary of it so that at the end of the day, we can tell that some progress is being made. Then continuing, we have what we call the synthesizers. It says that presentation devices that help the learner to integrate content elements into a meaningful whole in order to be able to assimilate them prior to knowledge. For example, a concept hierarchy or a procedural flowchart or a decision table or a cause and effect model, so that a synthesizer is like a presentation that would help our learners, a presentation that may be in the form of a diagram, that may be in the form of a flow chart, that may be in the form of a decision table, that will help our learners to be able to integrate content elements into a meaningful whole in order to be able to assimilate them. Then we have what we call analogies. And when we talk about analogies, we are saying that we should be able to relate the content to the learner's prior knowledge, what we used to call the previous knowledge. We should be able to relate the learner's the content to the learner's prior knowledge. We should be able to use simple analogies, especially with a highly divergent group of learners. And then we should have what we call cognitive strategies. Now, when we talk about cognitive strategies, we are talking about a variety of cues, pictures, diagrams, etc., that can trigger cognitive strategies needed for processing of material. Then finally, the theory talks about learner control. Learners are supposed to be encouraged to exercise control over both the content and the instructional strategy. There should be a clear labeling and separation of strategy components that will facilitate effective learner control over content that they're supposed to be mastering. This moves us to the Azure model. The Azure model is a 6-step instructional guide. It helps us in planning and delivering technology-supported lessons with a great focus on addressing the needs of the learner. When we talk about the Azure model, we are thinking about the 6 various steps that are to guide us as educational technologists or as tutors or as teachers to be able to deliver lessons that are supported by technology so that our focus is on addressing the needs of the learner. Azure is an acronym for the description of 6 classroom procedures that are central to the informed selection and use of educational technology. When we talk about Azure, we are looking at various procedures. And these procedures are central to the way we decide on the use of technology. It highlights 6 classroom procedures. And these 6 procedures are to analyze your learners. You need to state your objectives. You need to select your methods. You need to select your media and your materials. So the selection takes care of media, methods, and materials. Then the U is after selecting your methods, media, and materials, you may want to use, in fact, you will have to use the media and the materials. Then finally, before the final, we have the require the learner's participation. Even as you have materials that you are using, even as you have media that you are using, you need to have your learners participate in the lesson. So you require learner participation. And finally, we move on to the final one, which is evaluate and then revise. So the strategies is that one, we analyze our learners. When we want to analyze our learners, there are some general characteristics that we need to have as far as our learners are concerned. We look at their grade, we look at the age group, we look at sometimes the ethnic group, we look at sex, we look at mental, emotional capacities, physical and social issues. We may look at socioeconomic levels of our learners and so on and so forth. These are general characteristics when we talk about analyzing our learners. Then we may also have specific entry competencies or prior knowledge. There are sometimes when you want to teach a certain lesson, you may want to be sure that the learners you want to present this information to have some prior knowledge that would inure to their benefit, or that can be relied on so that they can understand the lesson. There might be some skill set necessary for certain lessons to be successful. And for that reason, you need to analyze your learners and see whether they are able to meet up with this criteria. You may also want to think about the learning styles or the verbal, whether it's the verbal, logical, or visual, and so on, the various learning styles of your learners. When you're doing this and taking care of them, what you are doing is to prepare yourself to have adequate information about your learners. And so you would have done a proper analyzing of your learners. Then secondly, we move on to the statement of your objectives, or what we call the learning outcomes. Now, your learning outcome may primarily be cognitive, it may be affective, or it may be geared toward the psychomotor skills of your learners. So, depending on what you want to achieve at the end of the lesson, your planning is going to be influenced in one way or the other. Then we move to the second S, which has to do with select or modify instructional methods, media, and materials. When we want to choose educational technology or media, This is a deliberate process. It is dependent because the success of our lesson is dependent on the kind of media that we will set. And this aspect, or the media that we may want to choose, depends on us having clear goals. As a teacher, you must set clear goals as to what you want to achieve. You must have a rationale or a thoughtful method for matching characteristics with expected outcomes. So we need to select the instructional method, whether we want to use a lecture, whether we want to use a group work, whether we want to use a field work, field trip, etc. Which one will be most appropriate to meet the objectives for a particular group of students that we may be teaching. We may want to look at materials that are relevant to the objectives that we have set. We can create our own materials, or we can use existing materials, and whichever way it is, it must be suitable for the lesson we want to teach. This takes care of material selection. Then we have media selections. For us to select the media, we need to select media based on the instructional method we want to use. Then, in addition, based on the objectives that we want to achieve. And finally, based on the needs of our students. Students should have easy access to the material or the media that is selected. It must be appropriate for the learning objectives and the teaching format that is being adopted. The media should be consistent with the students' capabilities and learning styles. Then, no single media or medium has a total solution. Tutors and students should all have access to this media and be able to use them. Going forward, having selected your media and materials, you will need to utilize them. So in order to utilize the media and materials that we have listed above, we should always preview the materials before using them. We should always go over whatever it is we want to use the media tools for in advance, work with it, and see how appropriate it will be so that there will be no surprises going forward. Don't assume that technology will always work, You must be ready with alternative plans, because sometimes technology can fail you. And when it does fail, what alternative plan do you have in place? You must prepare your learners. Give the students an overview, explain how they can use the media and the materials, and how they will be evaluated at the end of the course. You should be able to explain all these to your students. Then, having selected your media, you should require learner participation. We should incorporate questions and answers, self-assessments, discussions, group work, hands-on activities, and other ways of getting students actively involved in the learning process. You'd realize that the previous lesson we had, I got to a point and I paused and I requested that we have a discussion amongst ourselves, and then we express our thoughts based on the discussions that we have had. That is my way, for example, of incorporating learner participation. Secondly, we should make sure that all students have an opportunity to engage in the learning activities. We should focus on student learning as opposed to teaching them. We should encourage or provide opportunities to manipulate information. And then we should use strategies to get all students actively and individually involved in the lesson, and allow time for practice during the demonstration of various skills. Finally, for the Azure model, we come to the point of evaluate and revise. We should be involved in evaluation of the student performance, media components, and instructors' performance. How well are my students performing? How well was the media components I used suitable and appropriate? And were they able to deliver the purposes for which they were selected? And finally, how well did the instructor perform, or the facilitator? How well did the facilitator perform? We reflect on the stated objectives in the context of these three. And then we look at the content, the instructional strategy that was used. We look at the motivational strategies, the learning activities, the assessment, the time available to the students to study the content, and determine if they were effective. If they were effective, what can we do to maintain the standards or improve upon them? If they were not effective, what can we do to revise them until our students become successful learners? And this is what, in a nutshell, the Azure model is about. And that sends us to another learning system that we call the Instructional Development Learning System. The components of the Instructional Development Learning System are the need for us to design a task analysis, the need for us to develop a criterion test and performance measures, the need for us to develop interactive instructional materials, and then the need for us to validate the interactive instructional materials. In the doing of these, we have what we call prototypes. What do I mean by prototypes? A prototype is a partial realization of a product constructed for the purpose of testing one or another characteristics of the design. So when we have a prototype, it's like designing something that is similar to what is expected at the end of the day, so that we can check and see if it can withstand the rigors that is expected of the final product. So when we use prototypes to test products in the early stages of development, it is far less expensive, so that we don't go through the final development only to realize that there are flaws. In the prototype, if there are flaws, they can easily be diagnosed and then remedied very early. New ideas can also be tried, and then, or some ideas can be totally scrapped or fine-tuned before they are replicated on a large scale. So in rapid prototyping, we have a design process that we follow. We have the early development of a small-scale prototype used to test out certain key features of a design. You need to have an assessment of the needs. You need to set your objectives. You need to construct the prototype, the design. Then you use the prototype to determine whether it will do what it has been designed to do. And then finally, you install it for mass usage. So rapid prototyping has or follows a spiral cycle. We have what we call concept definition. We have the implementation of a skeletal system. We have user evaluation and concept refinement. Then we move to implementation of refined requirements. Then we move on to user evaluation and concept refinement, implementation of the refined requirements, and this goes on in a continuous cycle. This is a diagram that I'll make available to you that follows like a conceptual framework that talks about prototyping. In order to organize rapid prototyping, there are some steps that need to be followed. We need to get attention. We need to set direction. There's the need for presentation of relevant content. We need to demonstrate by showing and trying what we have done. And then we summarize. And then we take action and support. This is where our lesson today brings us. And I would want us to pause again. And in the next session, we will take a look at other aspects of our lesson. So, having come this far, I'd like to pause once again and then give you the opportunity to evaluate the material attached to this video, and let's see what comments will come from the class, address them, and then we make progress. Thank you once again. I remain your humble servant, Dr. Prince Edem Jakwasu. Have a great day.